How's it going, everyone? It's Sam. We've been talking about more companies that transact in Bitcoin, that hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And today, we have a life insurance company. A life insurance company that pays their policies, that accepts their premiums in Bitcoin. And it really makes you reconsider life insurance and what works for you because it's interesting. I actually just had someone that I work with in insurance reach out and try to talk to me about a whole life policy. And I'm thinking, well, if I live for 50, 60 years, that's going to be pretty much worthless. I could go put that money in Bitcoin and it'd probably be worth a lot more. It really does make you reconsider when you are a Bitcoiner how you want to save. And today we're talking with the co founder and CEO of Meanwhile, like I said, a Bitcoin backed insurance company. We're going to go through some of the hard questions that you probably have. There is going to be a link to them underneath the video, so if you want to sign up, you can just go on there too and you can book a time to talk with someone and ask them all the hard-hitting questions you have as a Bitcoiner. So definitely check out the link underneath the video. Let's get into the interview. Zach, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started at Meanwhile, and what you guys do over there?
Yeah. So I'm Zach. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Meanwhile. Meanwhile is a life insurance company for the Bitcoin economy. And both my co-founder and I were actually sort of financial technology folks. I started and sold a company in the banking space. He started and sold a company in the banking space. And we've just been long time Bitcoiners, not necessarily making it our job. I think not everyone has to make it their job, but for a long time, we just really believe there's going to be a Bitcoin economy, not just that Bitcoin's like an asset to hold, but there's going to be an economic system built on Bitcoin. So when we started the company, we sat down and we actually like wrote down like what are all the financial institutions that exist in most global economies, right? So there are banks and there are custodians and there are trading shops and there are payments companies and like we realized like okay, every economy has a life insurance company. And we can start talking about why people get buy life insurance and what it's for. But fundamentally, that's where we started. So we built this company, and we have a licensed, regulated life insurance company. It's in Bermuda, which is like the insurance capital of the world, not the Bahamas, which is where FTX was. Um, and what's unique about that company is I think we're the only company in the world that actually truly operates in the Bitcoin standard. So we state our financials in Bitcoin. We do all our like actuarial math in Bitcoin. People pay us premiums in Bitcoin. We pay claims out in Bitcoin. Like we're truly like built for this future economy in Bitcoin. And we're super excited about it. We think that these types of institutions are really important. I think they're really important for people here in the U.S., but also we look out at the 57 countries in the world that had inflation rates over 10% last year. And we think many, many people in those countries should be operating, on Bitcoin as their store of value.
Cool. So maybe you can give everyone a little reminder. I think most people know what life insurance is. The average age of people on the channel are 25 to 34. But
Great.
maybe you can explain why some people would choose term life versus whole life and kind of what's the thought process behind that before we add that extra layer of
Yeah.
denomination in Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, fundamentally, life insurance is like one of the oldest savings products in the world. It really started with like sailors around the Mediterranean, and you're like leaving Venice and you don't know if you're going to come back and what's going to happen to your family. So people would buy life insurance. But fundamentally, life insurance is about like what happens to your loved ones if you die before you're supposed to, and that is sort of it's just a random thing. I know like it's not random to me if I die, but like it's not very in any given year you're very unlikely to die, but what happens if you do. And that's life insurance, sort of protecting your loved ones for the long term. And then annuities is sort of the opposite, actually. There's just a probability that you might live really long. And if you live a long time, like what's your income look like? And then, that's annuity. So they're sort of like flip sides. Having said that, what happened is because, society thinks that, orphans and widows shouldn't starve. They're basically, which I agree with, just to be clear, there are tax advantages and tax incentives to get life insurance because people sort of underinsure systematically. Because you know what? If you're 25 to 34, you're probably like, I'm going to live forever. So who cares about life insurance? So what that means in the US and basically every other country in the world that has like capital gains tax or income tax is that life insurance tends to have like a privileged tax position. So on term life versus whole life, term life lasts a certain term, that's what it's called. So, last 10 years or 20 years, you might put in $1 and get like $100 back. So big ratios because you're really unlikely to die in the next 10 years. So it really is like catastrophic accidental death insurance. So I have a term life policy so that my wife can like pay off our mortgage, right? So that's sort of what term life's for. Whole life lasts your whole life. It's very well named. So because you will eventually die. Now, hopefully that's 50 years away for the people listening to this, or 60 years away. But because you will eventually die, a whole life policy will eventually pay out. So it's much more of a savings product, like an intergenerational wealth transfer product. You do get the protection of insurance, but more importantly, maybe, or just as importantly, you're getting these like what I think of as like truly hodl dynamics, right? Like if the purpose of hodling is like, for your loved ones or your kids or whatever it is, then, life insurance is basically a hodl product.
Sure.
Whole life insurance, sorry, is a hodl
Yeah.
product.
True story. I saw my insurance guy earlier this week. He just called me 10 minutes before we jumped on here and said that I should have a meeting with his boss, basically. And he told me earlier this week he thinks I should do whole life.
Yeah,
And right now I have a policy for the next 10 years or 20 years, something like that. And I'm just thinking, does that even make sense? Because what's $2 million in 60 years when I pass away?
exactly.
Yeah, is it worth it? So, as a Bitcoiner, obviously that's why you're taking this company in the Bitcoin direction. But like, what are your thoughts, first of all, just on, I guess, that fiat standard of like, would that ever make sense for a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old,
Yeah, look,
50 years away?
I do think the term life makes sense again, because if you have like liabilities in dollars, matching them with dollars makes a bunch of sense, right? So as I said, like I have this mortgage. If I drop dead, my wife can pay off the mortgage. I think that, like, and the mortgage is in dollars, obviously. So that all sort of makes sense. But I completely agree, right? If you bought a whole life policy 60 years ago, you might have bought it for something that seemed like an astronomically large number of dollars, right? You might have been like, oh, I'm going to get $50,000 in coverage, and in what is 60 years ago?
64?
So 1964. In
Yeah.
1964, that was a lot of money. But now, I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it's not changing people's lives, right? So I really like to think of Bitcoin less as, what's the price of Bitcoin? Today, I think price is the wrong word. Like I really think of like the exchange rate of Bitcoin, or the like purchasing power of Bitcoin. And that has gone up astronomically over the last obviously 15 years. But even if you pick the last 3 years, the last 5 years, the last 7 years, so that is exactly right. If you really want to protect your fiance or your wife or your your husband or your kids, or even your potential kids or your potential husband or wife, because you can change beneficiaries over time. I think there's the Bitcoin product makes a lot more sense. I mean, obviously, I'm building a whole company around that idea.
Well, I just ran some quick math, and let's say M2 or the money supply, whatever you want to look at, goes up 7% a year, which it's been higher than that from what I can tell recently. But it goes up 7% a year for the next 50 years. You're looking at debasement of 30x. So your $3 million policy is now worth 100,000 in today's
Yes.
dollars.
Yes.
So I guess my question would be, if you know if we're looking at Bitcoin and Bitcoin policies, why not just save the money now in Bitcoin? Like, why would I put it in
Yeah.
an insurance policy versus just buying?
Later. Look, I think there are really two reasons. One is that, and this is like a sort of a fundamental question, so some Bitcoiners, will believe this. I think that no matter what happens to the dollar, there is still going to be a United States government taxing us in 60 years. So what's nice about these products is the Bitcoin whole life product that we have, is that it is just the way the Internal Revenue Code was written. We can comply with all the rules to be life insurance. And then you're getting these tax benefits. One tax benefit, there's the protection, there's that it's increasing in value without you paying intermediate like income or interest tax. The really cool thing about it is actually while you're alive, you can take a policy loan against the policy. So, if you put 10 Bitcoin in like 15, 20 years, you need to liquidate some of your Bitcoin. Actually, this is the best Bitcoin to liquidate because it's like you locked in your capital gains tax basis now, and you get to like pull out new tax basis Bitcoin in the future through this policy loan. And then the fourth, actually sort of a hedge, is that we're in Bermuda, and people put assets offshore for like asset protection reasons. So reason one is just instead of putting in a cold wallet, like it's much harder for the government. Well, it can be harder for the government to get, and in an important sense, it's complying with all these tax rules. The second reason insurance is good is actually, I think, the most controversial thing about it, which I think we're going to talk about, which is the way the product works is you put like 1 Bitcoin in a year for 10 years. And I should just say these are ratios. So it can be 1/10 of a Bitcoin a year for 10 years, or it could be 10 Bitcoin a year for 10 years. Anyway, so 1 Bitcoin a year for 10 years, that's 10 Bitcoin. And we promise you a fixed guaranteed payout, or promise your beneficiaries. That number is bigger. So it's like 15. And the way we do that, and what we're able to do is, I guess we do like all the dirty words in Bitcoin, right? So you send us your Bitcoin, and then we hypothecate it with everyone else's Bitcoin. And then we do super conservative, really boring, like B2B term lending. So we lend to, not Three Arrows and Voyager, but we lend to like big name brands that folks know, and we get a little bit of yield. So we're all about asset protection. It's not like BlockFi where they were saying, oh, you're gonna get 7% in your Bitcoin, you're gonna get 10% in your Bitcoin. We're trying to get like 2.5% on Bitcoin. And the reason we have to do that is like that's the way the tax rules are written. So to get the tax benefits, there has to be this rate of return in the policy. But that rate of return is also like a reason to do it, right? We're running this super conservative, like largely hypothecated thing that we also have to put up a ton of capital to do this, which is like first loss capital. So that savings rate itself, which is like building an economic engine around Bitcoin, like for us, Bitcoin is not just gold in the ground, like it's needs to be money in your wallet. And we're trying to build an institution that does that. Anyway, I went all over the place, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's okay. You got thrown off by people coming in the room.
Yeah.
So my biggest question then is, okay, you're taking the Bitcoin, rehypothecating it it goes out to institutions. Obviously, you're taking collateral, or there's some kind of
Oh yeah, yeah.
guardrail,
I mean,
right?
imagine like 100-page master lending agreements, covenants, collateral, parental guarantees. Like, the guy we have, if he worked at like, who does our credit stuff, he worked at like Fitch and bond insurers, and like we're super conservative. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
You're good. So you do that. Let's say whoever you're lending to, right? You're doing everything in Bitcoin. You give them 10 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin, whatever it is. They take that. They think there's a better trade somewhere. So they sell it. They trade whatever. Maybe they make a couple bucks. But let's say Bitcoin goes and does a 3x. And
Yeah.
then they have to convert back to Bitcoin. What happens? Like, what are the
Yeah,
collateral
you should
requirements to
think
make
of our
sure?
lenders more. Sorry, our borrowers. I'll give you three categories of borrowers. One
Yeah.
set of borrowers we have are miners.
Okay.
So we lend them Bitcoin. They obviously use that Bitcoin to like buy mining equipment or whatever. We have to do a lot of due diligence and like price of electricity, like what happened in the halving, like their equipment, blah blah blah. They post all of that, like the physical machines, their substation as collateral. But they have cash flows in Bitcoin,
Mm.
right? So they're paying back this loan over time, and they like it because they've hedged away their dollar exposure, right? So the price of Bitcoin tanks, they can still pay their loan off. But if the price of Bitcoin goes up, it's easy for them to pay their loan off too, right? So that's like one set of borrowers. Another set of borrowers, I'd say, are like people who are doing like treasury operations, payments. So think like inter-day settlement for Bitcoin. And instead of using their own balance sheet, they could like borrow 1,000 Bitcoin from us. That Bitcoin sort of sits in the pot. They put 50 more in. That's like 5% returns. They're just like in and out every day. It's not really like trading to make money. It's just like a settlement pool. At the end of the year, we get the 1,050 back, right? So we've made 5%. And we can see that. We can see what they're doing with it, right? And that's charter house.
Hmm.
And then the third, which has a little element of what you're saying, is like market makers. Um, and the reason market makers make sense is they can like get out of whack. So you need collateral and you need parental guarantees and stuff. But fundamentally, they are in the business of like taking a pile of Bitcoin and turning into more Bitcoin. So that's what sort of the things we do now. And I should say on the institutional market makers, usually think more like people who have multi-billion-dollar balance sheets. Might also trade equities and ETFs. So if Bitcoin like went up, that'd be fine. Not a we do. I'm not actually sure we have any like what I call like true native like crypto only borrowers, right? We do not let people like post FTT and bonk to as collateral. So anyway, that's the range of things. And like fundamentally though, what we see is when we look out 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and I think a lot of our customers look out that same time frame for obvious reasons, we think there's going to be economic activity in Bitcoin. So although this is what we do now, at the end of the day, we believe there's like a fundamental connection between like Bitcoin and energy and commodities and like settlement. So we believe there'll be more and more like real economic activity denominated in Bitcoin, and then that'll allow for more debt capital markets to be in Bitcoin. And the cool thing about our company is both that we are making the bet that there will be true economic activity in Bitcoin, but also our existence is part of helping make that world a reality. Yeah.
Yeah. I when you said rehypothecation, of course, like I thought alarm bells. That's like the
Yeah, of
first thing
course.
because
Of course.
as a Bitcoiner, the number
The
one
truth is
rule.
actually, if I could get people the tax
Yeah.
benefits without
Yeah.
hypothecating, I would do that. It is sort of a result. And another question people often ask is like, oh, should I do this with all my Bitcoin? My answer is no. I mean, I've done with all my Bitcoin as a a statement of faith. But I think for a lot of our users, you know, they might have Bitcoin in, a hardware wallet. They might have some Bitcoin on an exchange. They might have some Bitcoin on like Casa Unchained or Swan and some like multi-sig. And I think we see ourselves like another one of those buckets, like not necessarily like take all of your Bitcoin, put it in us. We uh, we see a lot more like, okay, I really like these protection and tax benefits. I want there to be a Bitcoin economy. I, you know, hopefully I can uh, convince you on some level that like we're very careful with this capital. We have an independent board, and we have a regulator, and we have an enterprise risk management framework, and we have a credit committee, and we have all this stuff. And that it makes sense. But look, in every Bitcoiner's heart that I talk to, man, we're very fortunate now to have like dozens and dozens of users and um, hundreds of Bitcoin. Um, it's early days though, but in every Bitcoiner's heart, there's like this love of self custody, and this, on the other hand, there's like this hatred of taxes, and like you're somewhere in that tension. And I think for a lot of people, that tension ends up being like, oh, maybe 10% or 20% of my stack, it makes sense to put in this vehicle. And also, one last thing is that because you pay us over 10 years, that is, you pay like 1 Bitcoin a year for 10 years. I think that also gives people comfort. There's a lot of things we're careful about to make it clear that we're not like trying to YOLO anyone's funds. And I think one, being very transparent about what we're doing, and two is actually the product structure itself, I think lends people some comfort.
I think it makes sense to structure it or look at it as we have different buckets for our Bitcoin, just like we might hold the S&P 500, but we don't just all hold it in a brokerage account. We have
Yes,
401ks, HSAs, Roth IRAs for different tax.
exactly. Exactly. Maybe that's a macro story, all the way back to like because orphans and widows shouldn't starve, like their tax benefits for life insurance. Actually, if you're like upper middle class, upper class, whatever, after you max out your 401k and your IRA, the next thing you do is often an annuity because it's accumulating tax free. And like, as you get more sophisticated, life insurance, it sounds like this might be applied to you, Sam, with this whole life pitch, like enters into the mix. So we have two pretty distinctive user bases, actually. One is like crypto native, like Bitcoin natives, Bitcoin maxis, and then we're explaining to them life insurance and how it works. And we have these other sets of users who actually they might be really rich, and they already know about life insurance. They're already using life insurance structures. One of our users, this is unimaginable to me, he has like $200 million in life insurance. And then for them, it's actually, maybe they only have a few Bitcoin, but we're coming to them and saying like, oh, well, here's a structure for that Bitcoin. Those people actually do like sometimes put all their Bitcoin in. But anyway, so it's just to say that it's a sophisticated like ARB life insurance that as you get wealthier, more and more people get into.
Obviously, you guys are scaling up based on what you're saying, but are you even considering other products like a Bitcoin annuity or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely do a Bitcoin annuity in time, uh, which is really just like another like a 401k or an IRA, like a annuity. Annuities in their accumulation phase or like those. We struggle a little bit with term life, actually. One of the things about term life, it does really serve a purpose, and like you are like really paying for something, which is this protection. But most users don't get paid out, right? So that's like the whole point of term life, is you're pretty unlikely to die in the next 20 years. But if you did, that would like really suck, obviously, because you're so young. So then like let's have this protection. But as a Bitcoiner, it's a little weird to say like, oh, pay me 1/10 of a Bitcoin for this term life policy. And then like almost everyone will get to the end of that 20 years and not get paid out.
Mhm.
And although, again, that's like a real product with real usefulness, I think because Bitcoin is likely to really increase in purchasing power, there's something that feels weird about that. And we really, I hope it's clear, like we really want this to be a product that can just make sense, and is really serving, I think, or aligns with uh, like the cultural norms of Bitcoin. And obviously, on one hand, on like one set of things, we do not, because of like you send us your Bitcoin and we hypothecate it, we get yield on it. But on the other hand, again, like life insurance, whole life insurance, and Bitcoin have this alignment, I think, on hodling. Um, and we just see that for almost every one of our policyholders. One of the reasons they own Bitcoin is like for legacy. They and that's what life insurance is about. Our whole life insurance is about. It's about legacy. Anyway, so we'll do an annuity, and then like we're not quite sure beyond that.
It is interesting because you kind of have to reframe how you think about insurance policies based on devaluation versus appreciation,
Exactly.
Bitcoin versus the US dollar. So it is an interesting mind exercise or something to go through. But maybe you can give us a little bit of an idea for what your typical client would look like, what kind of policies they might have. And you don't have to go into specifics, like we only accept people that have one Bitcoin every year to give us or something like that. But like,
Oh
eh,
no, I can
but
give you the
yeah.
specifics actually. So like look, our demographic is like 25 to 45-year-old men. Basically all of our users are men. Uh that's just like I guess who Bitcoiners are, and tend to be somewhere between like serious. I'll just not all of our users are male, but I'll just like talk as though they are. Somewhere between like serious girlfriend to two kids.
Mm.
Um, so just starting to think about like, okay, I have this Bitcoin, I want to like do some planning, like how's that work? And then our policies range in size from one Bitcoin paid over 10 years, so it's a tenth of a Bitcoin a year for 10 years, up to about 25 Bitcoin paid over 10 years. So that's like 2.5 Bitcoin a year. The reason we don't go beyond that, um, we have had some users ask us to go higher than that, is because we're careful about concentration risk. If that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
um, our mortality pool, we're super careful. And that's another thing I'd say. We're very, very careful on that. We're very fortunate, right? If you're a 25 to 40-year-old, 45-year-old man, you're likely pretty healthy. But we do reject a much higher percentage of people, I think, than a normal life insurance company. Um, and that's because we're in these early days, and we want to be really prudent. So I guess healthy 25 to 45-year-old man somewhere between serious girlfriend and two kids, and with something between wanting to have one Bitcoin over the next 10 years and already having 25.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you guys give coaching when someone signs up? Let's say they say, I'm going to put up zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, but I only have zero point 0.5 Bitcoin right now. Like, do you make sure that they have it? Because I'm just thinking, like, worst case scenario. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
what happens if you're 5 years in and you're like, oh, Bitcoin's at $500,000. I can't buy that next zero point 0.1 Bitcoin to put
yeah,
in.
yeah. This is something we are very careful about. Like, look, you need to it's not quite the same, but you need to be what in Bermuda is called sophisticated, which is like accredited. I mean, a lot of people are accredited in the US. Um, there are some of our users who like that dollar cost averaging. Um, but you could really be upside down. And yeah, what happens is the same thing that happens sort of with any whole life insurance policy, which is there's like this savings account element in the policy called a surrender value, which is literally if you surrender the policy, you don't pay then you get back that amount, but it is less than you pay in. So it's not great to lapse. So yeah, I think I would not. This is sort of back to the question you had about like, the thing we talked about, like what should this be like what all your Bitcoin is, right? So if you only have zero point 0.5 Bitcoin and I wouldn't necessarily take 100% of your Bitcoin that you have and put in this policy or plan to put in it. Although we probably do have some users who've done that. I would more think of it like if you have a Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoin or 3 Bitcoin, or you're like planning to have that much no matter what, really, then buying a 1 Bitcoin policy, right, like a third of your planned corpus, like I think that can make a lot of sense.
Sure. What kind of questions am I not asking that you would be asking or people typically ask? What's a good question that can give people a little bit more information?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that one thing we do is when you sign up on the website and we underwrite you and do like know your customer stuff, me or one of my colleagues talks to every single person who signs up. And that's really to make sure that they're comfortable, that they understand the product. So people have all sorts of questions. One big question we get is like, do you need to go get a medical exam? And the answer to that is no, you do need to fill out a big application. Like we ask you, do you have cancer? If you say, no, I don't have cancer, and then you die 2 weeks from now from cancer, then we do not pay out. I mean, I guess if you really didn't know, but anyway, so we ask you these questions, and then you need to answer them. And between that and some like data we can get with your permission, we can underwrite people. So that's a big question we get. Like, do you have to like go have a bunch of blood work done and that stuff? And the answer is no. I think we talked about it. Like people are, you really hit the big things. Like how's the core product work, which is like that limit, 10 pay whole life. And then people obviously want to really understand the lending to get the yield. And then the last thing I'll just say is like people, it tends to be a very interesting window into everyone's like individual esoteric. I don't mean that in a bad way. Like planning needs, like so we don't, we're not your tax advisor, we're not your estate planner, all that stuff. But I would say that like people do tend to ask a lot of questions about that, like, oh, like should I have a will? Should I not have a will? Like, should I have a trust? Should I have a trust? All these like things that like are really worth thinking about, even if you have like 1, 2, 3 Bitcoin, let alone a lot more. And we try to help people and point them in that direction and sort of see where life insurance fits into that. Even though like that's not really our core job.
It's interesting because with a normal company, I don't think like if State Farm talked to you about insurance, you would just think about whether it's right for you, like what you get out of it. But with something where you're handing Bitcoin over, even if it's an exchange or anything, you always like consider the company you're going with. So it is interesting to go through some of these questions. I think people probably ask you a lot more questions than they would ask, some other insurance company, like I said, because it sounds like an awesome product, but there's always something in the back of our minds as Bitcoiners. So it is.
Absolutely.
If people do have more questions though, like I'm talking about, can they reach out to you guys? They can schedule something.
Yeah. So as I said, if you go to our website, which is meanwhile.bm, which is Bermuda.
We'll put a link underneath the video for it.
Yeah. Meanwhile.com goes there too. And if you just sign up, we'll actually like reach out to you. Or there's also an email address, which is hello@meanwhile.bm. But I'd say you're absolutely right. Like, look, I think I probably like a lot of your listeners, I have lost some Bitcoin over the years, between like BlockFi and Genesis, and there's been a lot of frauds and Ponzi's and stuff. And that's one of the reasons we as I said, we sat down and we said, okay, I believe there's going to be a Bitcoin economy. I don't know if it's going to be the largest economy in the world, but I think it could really be like a top 5 global economy in GDP. And there's going to be real economic activity, and there's going to be capital markets, and there's going to be debt capital markets, and there's going to be financial institutions. And we started from that premise. And I'll tell you, it has been a real slog. Like we probably could have tried to just YOLO life insurance, but instead, like we went to Bermuda and we like run a functioning life insurance company, right? Like we like do all this actuarial math, and we have an independent board of directors, and we have an enterprise risk management framework and a chief risk officer, and like um, just a huge amount of work to really build what I think could be a defining critical, institution, financial institution of this economy. And I think we're honored in a way that in the 6 months we've been operating, like so many people have trusted us. But that's an obligation. And I think the way the space has been operating, can often feel like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And we're every day, my colleagues and I, we really ask ourselves, like, how do we build this company for the long term? Because I think Bitcoin is going to last forever, and I think that this company will last forever too.
Zach, great job today. Really appreciate having you on. I really like talking to people that are not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk, having their business use Bitcoin, treasury assets, and Bitcoin. So it's great to have you on. We'll have to have you back again too. Best of luck until we have
Hey,
you.
when we launch the annuity, let's chat again.
Let's talk about it. All right, sounds good.
All
We'll
right.
have to have you
Thanks,
back
Sam.
on.
I really appreciate your time. Cheers.
Yep, definitely. Talk soon. Bye.